Comics, TV shows, movies. We're surrounded by heroes of all kinds all of the time. Ever since the US popularized comics in the 30s, it's been pretty difficult to live without them. Over the years, comics have evolved with our culture, moving from the funny pages to magazines to the big and small screen. As the comic book industry began to grow and all ages were able to read their own stuff, the question came up over time, where are the girls' comics? My name is Maya, a typical comic book geek. And together, let's look at Impact, Women in Comics. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Why this? Why this topic above all others? I'm not a comic book geek. Or, for those who are, how does this affect me? But really, this topic affects our entire culture and the way we look at media. And, by default, us.
Her ability to control the minds of men is why Alpha is an all-female squad for this mission.
Oh, really? And would you have felt the need to justify an all-male squad for a given mission?
There's no right answer for that, is there? So, Nightwing out.
The comic book industry is a major one, not just for the entertainment value for us, but for the sales for them. As of 2014, Diamond Comic Distributors, the largest comic distributor in North America, released making $540.4 million in 2014. So yeah, it's a big deal to some people. But no matter how big it is, within this big industry, a lot of discrimination takes place. Just recently, an 11-year-old girl named Rowan wrote a letter to DC Comics about how there wasn't enough media about female superheroes. She stated, "Marvel Comics made a movie about a talking tree and a raccoon awesome, but you haven't made a movie with Wonder Woman." DC replied that a Supergirl TV show and Wonder Woman movie were in the works for 2017. For the first time since the TV show Wonder Woman in 1979. This affects everybody involved, including those that work in the comic book shops that distribute the comics, much like the Queen City Queen, Virginia Kerrigan. As of the time I interviewed her, Virginia was the only woman working in a comic book shop in Buffalo. She works in Queen City bookstores with Emil Novak Sr. and his son, Emil Novak Jr. Do you think you've ever been discriminated against being a woman in the comic book industry?
Yeah, I'd like to say no. Unfortunately, no matter where you go and what you do, you're going to find some form of discrimination. In here, I have specific memories of times where I've been discriminated against, or customers don't want to deal with me. They'd rather deal with one of the guys here.
Okay, are you comfortable sharing any specific stories, like any specific customers that stand out?
I've had a couple of phone calls where, people have called and asked for books, or not even books. People have called and asked for Emil. I say, well, he's with a customer, and they say, well, I need to speak to Emil. I said, well, if you need me to pull comics for you or anything else like that, just let me know. They're like, no, I just need to speak to him. And so I'll hand the phone off, and I'll hear him say, Virginia can help you with these problems. So there's a little bit of that. I've had male customers come in the store who didn't want to deal with me. I'm not sure if it was necessarily discrimination or nerves or what it was, but it gets to you a little bit. It does bother me.
This isn't the most original story, Though the discrimination of women into comics has gone down throughout the years, it's still common enough of an event that if you put female comic book fans in a room, chances are a lot of them can relate to Virginia, walking into or working in a comic book shop and no one bothering with them. Why do you think you're the only female working in a comic book shop in Buffalo? Why do you think that is?
Comic books have always been a very male-dominated hobby, and it hasn't been until the last few years that women have started to collect more comics, be more involved with comics, not give their boyfriends or husbands grief because they buy comic books. I think the movies are helping a little bit with that. I think that TV shows are helping with that because, girls watch Arrow or girls go see the Avengers movie with their boyfriend or husband and, they want to read the comics, and that's great. And I love when female customers come in and I can introduce them to comic books. That's great. I just think there's that stigma around women that we're maybe not cool enough to work at a comic book shop or not knowledgeable enough to work at a comic book shop. But that's not how the guys here feel about me. They know that I know my stuff and they know that I love comics. And I get along with just about everybody. And that might be why I'm the only girl.
Being ignored isn't the only problem. The stereotypes about women are spreading to the next generation. Women needing to be saved is a very popular stereotype, like how Lois Lane is caught from falling in, what, every Superman movie ever made?
I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
What's wrong, little one?
They won't let me play pirates with them.
And why not?
Because I'm the girl and they need someone to save. It's okay. I don't even know how to sword fight.
Neither do they. In battle, they'd be slaughtered instantly. Would you like me to teach you how to sword fight? They're using the horizontal cut, but in close like they are, the thrust is a better move as it's more likely to cause real injury and less likely to be blocked by your opponent. Do you understand?
Uh-huh.
Now go, unleash hell.
That was sweet, teaching her to disembowel her playmates like that.
A lot of the reverse lessons are there for boys, right? They learn that they're the center of the action, right? They're important because the stories exist surrounding them, right? They define the action, they move the action, they resolve the issue. Right? That's kind of heady stuff to learn that you matter that much and really to the exclusion of others, right? And it's a very, as we said, the role of women has been very limited. And there's very powerful lessons to see who's included and who's excluded and who's present in what way.
There are two major reasons I wanted to interview Dr. Jen Hunt. One, her research in gender studies as a social psychologist. Two, because she's raising two children, a little boy and girl, so her love of comics can easily affect them and the way she's raising them as well.
Just to draw an analogy to fairy tales, I don't know if I told you this, but I enrolled the kids in this dance class that was called Storybook Dance. It's like creative movement, right? And I thought that this would be all sorts of fun. But all the stories that these dances were based on these terrible gender stereotypes, right? And so, they would come out of dance and Desi would come up and she would be like, I was a fairy and there was a dragon and I was so scared and I was trembling and then Demetrius was a knight and he rescued me. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I went to the director and said, these are some stories, but there are other stories. There are other stories where the girls save themselves, where the girls save the boys. We need to do some of this too, right? But, part of what I didn't like about that class, and, then drawing the analogy to traditional comic books, was not only that it taught Desi that she needed to wait to be rescued, But it taught Demetrius that that's what girls did, right? That, he needed to step in and to be that rescuer and to not expect that girls could do that for themselves.
That helpless factor can be found throughout comic book history. Women needing to be rescued, this scene not being one of them, along with being the background when comparing them to male characters. You see these cute little chibi-like things? They're Funko Pop vinyls created by, what do you know, the company Funko, for the upcoming Marvel movie, Avengers: Age of Ultron. But there seem to be a few characters missing, like one of your most awesome female characters ever. Gosh, even Black Widow doesn't look too happy about it. Of course, women that work for some of these big companies can't really win in an argument about these cliches to really stop them, with there being so few of them. In November 2014, 721 creators were credited in making DC Comics. Only 9.8% of them were women. During that same month, Marvel, with 611 creators, credited 10.8%. Why would these cliches be such a problem? Well, it makes the female characters not relatable. Being a relatable character in any form of media is actually pretty important. Though comics are often an escape, it's nice to see a character that looks like the average person walking down the street. While it makes sense to see practical models, it's also nice to see someone larger than a size 5 or someone without the most proportioned face. It's the same reason that when the big, loud, and proud Amanda the Wall Waller was slimmed down for DC's New 52, people were not amused. Okay, state your name for the record. I had to.
I'm Michael Hoffer Jr. I am a comic book enthusiast of 15 years. I help out at Queen City, and I'm also recently a mailman.
So, who's your favorite comic book character?
My favorite comic book character. Yes. Oh, that's really difficult. It kind of probably Daredevil. Daredevil? No, Batman. I mean, Batman was the first. My first tattoo was the bat symbol. 75 years, and he's still just as interesting as he was in 1939.
He's evolved just as much as, like, say, Wonder Woman has.
Absolutely. If he might actually have evolved less. I mean, Wonder Woman has changed radically from what she was in the very beginning when she was created by William Marston.
As women became more infatuated with the comic book industry, society began to change even more. The moment that Wonder Woman became introduced to the world, people became obsessed with this woman, this powerful woman, that might have a chance against the great Superman.
Yeah, I mean, the character of Kamala Khan she's interesting, she's complex, and she's relatable. And, it doesn't matter that she is a 13-year-old Pakistani girl. Reading her story is interesting. And that's the most important thing.
Kamala Khan is a great character, and she's a relatable character, like Mr. Hufford said. One of her best traits is just not being a source of fan service. Her comic is filled with comedy and just upbeat moments that we all love. Of course, it's not just the comics that can be upbeat, as I show with my next interview.
My husband and I, we've gone out and done vacations based on comic books. Like we went to Comic-Con in San Diego.
That's true. You went to San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
You cosplayed, right?
Yes, I cosplayed as Hello Kitty, Courtney Crumrin that we talked about, and Jim wanted to do a couple's costume, so he went as Green Arrow, and I went as Black Canary. So we were trying to find a couple's costume that we would both feel comfortable wearing.
Black Canary.
Yeah, okay, but like she wears a jacket.
True.
So like I'm like, okay.
So why do you think people consider comic books a boys' thing, even after all these years?
Well, all of your biggest titles and all the classic titles not all of it, but many of your classic titles, and even all the ones that are getting adapted to television now, are male protagonists. A Batman, a Superman, a Spider-Man. Yeah, you go into a comic book store, and even so many of the new comic books, even if they have female protagonists, they're very often, particularly the cover art, is drawn to be sexier than it needs to be. Like one of the most popular comics out now is Deadpool. And yes, he's a big, brawny guy, and he's very physically fit, but he's also notoriously, hideously ugly under that mask. Right. You couldn't get away with that with a female character, I don't think, and have it be as popular.
Shortly after this, she mentioned something that was actually mentioned in 2 of my interviews.
There is a comic book writer as well as a regular writer, or a cartoon book writer, Alison Bechdel. Have you heard of the Bechdel test?
Have you heard about the Bechdel test?
Oh yeah, actually, the last person I interviewed mentioned that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So, the idea being that you can kind of do a quick check on sexism by asking, are there at least 2 female characters? Do they have names? Do they actually talk to each other about something besides men?
This, of course, means that some comics are just destined to fail the test. I then decided to interview somebody that would have a more personal opinion on the matter. After all, it does pay his bills. But yeah, decides to be snarky and all that crap.
Are you using crap words now? How old are you? You can't use that word.
I'm turning 16 this year.
Not old enough to use the C word. That's just a little C word. I don't even want to imagine what audacity would allow you to use the other C word.
My godfather, everybody. Anyway. Okay, so how did you get into comics?
Been drawing my entire life. There's a number of artists and at least one professional cartoonist in my family. And I knew from elementary school that cartooning is what I wanted to do. I think I remember the day in 4th grade, I believe it was, that I sort of set my sights on that goal. And I pretty much just stuck with it. It's always been the number one interest in my life, and I've always known that it was going to be my career.
Cool. So that's how you got into your profession?
Yeah, I mean, I had a natural capacity for drawing. I think part of the reason that it ended up this way is that for good or ill, I just sort of directed all my energies into drawing. Maybe if I'd been more social, I would have become a basketball star or something. Although my height, I doubt it. But I'd say it was always the thing I was good at, and I guess I just poured all my effort into there.
Okay. So, what about the way you draw your women? Because through the amount of comics that you make that I'm allowed to go through, it's like I've noticed a certain pretty much sexualizing.
Well, my stuff is actually, well, I guess I could be of 2 minds on this, as I appear to be on everything. The action-oriented stuff, and that would be Weapon Brown again. That's really the project that I've invested the most time into in the most in the last few years. So that really dominated a lot of my time as far as drawing. That's a little bit more standard as far as the portrayal of women and men. It's a bit more standard. I would say it's pretty much par for the course as far as typical action comics. Except for the more R-rated material, most of what I put in there is pretty predictable as far as the portrayal of men and women. The man character, Weapon Brown himself, is a typical over muscled He-Man. His female counterparts are usually drawn lusciously and with a lot of exposed skin. But that's sort of in keeping with the tone of the book itself, which is, the sort of, action barbarian type stuff. I mean, there's nothing terribly original about how I portray men and women. But I will say that I think my own attempt in Weapon Brown, despite having a lot of the typical male-female cliches, I did try to be conscious of not being exploitive beyond need. So, for instance, I've got the character, the lead female character is Anne, and she's got kind of like a sort of bikini-like costume. There's a lot, there's a lot of leg, there's a lot of cleavage, and so on. But as a character herself, she's not really a damsel in distress, in her personality. Even though she is often a damsel in distress in circumstances because she's blind, so she's actually kicks as much ass as a blind person can kick, but she's also the leader of the good guys. So she has authority and she has personality, and she's not even that good natured.
Why do you think people, after all these years, still consider comics a boys' thing?
Well, I suppose it's probably because most of the industry targets this stuff towards boys, and there's really just no ignoring it. The American comics industry once had a more thriving market share, maybe I should say, for girls' comics, romance comics, girls' adventure comics, things that were targeted not exclusively to boys. And over time, the superhero and adventure genre just started to move more towards a market that was aimed specifically at boys and getting dollars from boys, and girls sort of the victims of having less material made for them. And then the real change in comics in the last generation has been the rise of manga and all its girl-centric stuff. I mean, there's just lots and lots of stuff there for girls to enjoy as comics. And so the American market for comics, the mainstream stuff, the sort of Marvel and DC stuff, is still largely interested in things that speak directly to adolescent boys. But if you factor in the Japanese market, you've got a much broader range of topics, and I think you will agree that there's a lot of really cool and still really girly female leads that can speak directly to the female audience.
How about young boys?
What about them?
Sorry, how do you think comics have influenced them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I guess that's a good question. I tend to think that guys who are too into comics probably are less aggressive and chase girls less. That's my knee-jerk reaction. But then again, most of the guys I know who read comics have got a good dating life or are married, so I'm not sure that really counts. I guess my real answer is I don't see any. If we're talking about superhero comics, and that genre, action adventure comics, I really don't see it having much of an impact on boys' understanding of women, with the exception of there are plenty of comics that are like really exploitive and really play up the cheesecake and stuff, and I suppose that could give some boys a very juvenile attitude towards women. But I think there's just as many comics that have pretty positive or mature attitudes towards girls in them. I think the only thing that I could say about comics or even entertainment in general is that this is just something I've noticed in recent years. The only influence that I could say that's probably really negative is just a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of male-female relationships. I think a lot of I would say movies now, but it goes in comics. But I noticed just recently that a lot of comics and stuff aimed at boys and stuff usually represent the girls as being the aggressors in like dating situations. Like usually the guy is sort of like a shy Peter Parker type or something like that. Even if he's going to turn out to be the hero in the end, he's usually sort of shy and withdrawn, and when he gets the girl at all, it's usually because the girl made the advance, and that's just really the opposite of the way things work in real life. I think
I'm gonna be honest. I mainly asked that question because of a point that was brought up partway through my project. There isn't only one gender that's being discriminated against here. Males are in fact discriminated against in comics too, and that's a quick point that should be mentioned in this project.
You asked me about what Demetrius Lord's about women, but I think there's also a lot of things we want to think about with respect to men, right? And in gender studies, there's this kind of growing attention that's being paid to what we consider to be masculine and how men define masculinity, and there's kind of a growing consensus that masculinity is a very kind of precarious state that has to be one to begin with, and that it has to be kind of constantly re-earned, right? That men have to man up. They have to prove their manhood. They can lose their man card if they do something girly, right? And I think you see a lot of this in comic books, right? This idea that men have to be tough, they have to be stoic, that they're strong, that they get into fights, that they're not emotional, right? And Demetrius was the Flash for Halloween. I don't know if you saw his costume.
Oh yeah, I did. Now that I think about it,
but his costume was,
yeah,
with all these fake bulging muscles, and I was hesitant to let him wear it, in all honesty, because on one hand, he wanted to be the Flash because he wanted to be fast, and that's great. But on the other hand, the image of what his body should look like in that costume is just as unrealistic as the image of what Desi's body could look like for a Barbie doll. Right? And, so we talk a lot about feeding women a narrow view of what they can be. Right? But we also need to talk about how narrow the box we try to put men is. And in some ways, it may be even narrower, right? Name me the hero of any book who's a feminine man.
I think that really depends on the comic and what time period. Because once upon a time, you could consider Superman one of them, and then they went backwards again.
But you see where I'm going.
You're
right.
I can't off the top of my head think of any.
Mm-hmm. It's at least reasonably acceptable for girls to be tomboys, right? It's not acceptable for young boys to be feminine. We call them sissies. We call them fags. We call them all sorts of unpleasant things that indicate disapproval, right? And, so I think that, in the same way that we need to look at the portrayal of women in comics, we also need to look at the portrayal of men. And, one of the things that I think about with Demetrius is, how can I make sure that his diet, if you will, of reading, includes other images of manhood besides having to, be the hero, be the fighter, be stoic, be aggressive, all of these things that really we tend to see. We normalize that, right? But things that we normalize have great power because we stop recognizing them. We stop naming them. They're just the way that things are. And, well, they're one way, but, we're making them the whole way.
Now, even though women have been treated poorly by the comic book industry throughout the years, it doesn't happen all the time, and there is a silver lining. More women have entered the world of comics. I mentioned earlier in this video that women are often portrayed as sex objects, or as women that lose a lot of, or care a lot about their weight. But not every person in the industry is concerned about their character's weight. Another form of comics that people often forget counts is webcomics. There are a lot of webcomics out there, but one example of one that shows both sides of the spectrum, and by that I mean the positive one, is Between Friends.
I guess you could say it was pretty organic. I mean, it's just, you know, if I was on the phone, I would doodle. I just like to draw all the time, and I liked comics, so that's how it came from there. For getting my strip published, actually, I started out by, when I was in university, I did some cartoons, and I submitted them to the university newspaper, and there was a women's newsletter around at the time, and I sent a few cartoons to that. And what else? Then I started trying to send out to the syndicates, and I was just about ready to give up because I just thought, well, it's not going anywhere. Maybe I should try to get a book published, which I thought would be easier, which I found is not. And then one day, I'd sent out a few syndicates again, and I thought, this is going to be the last time because it's not working. And then my husband and I were out shopping, and I came home one day, and my message machine was blinking, you know, the old-fashioned way of getting messages. And I picked it up, and it was the editor. It was Jay Kennedy, who was the editor of King Features in New York. And he said he really liked my submission, and they wanted to offer me a contract. And which, of course, you know, I got things going right away, and we signed. In 2 weeks after I signed with King Features, I had a letter from Universal Press, which is another major syndicate, and they didn't offer me a contract, but they had wanted to see more of my work. So I guess I had just sort of hit a point where I had something viable for them. I enjoy all kinds of comics, but I particularly like reading works by women, and I think that's just because who I am. I read Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, and I mean, I'm not Iranian. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Are you familiar with that graphic novel?
I've heard of it. A friend of my mom's has pressured me into reading it.
Oh, you should read it. It's just an amazing. I couldn't put it down. It's about this woman from Iran and all the things she went through growing up, and how her parents wanted to get her out of Iran, and she went to, oh gosh, I can't remember all the details. She went to France, and it's all about her life during this political time. It's really interesting. I think that comics are a very unique medium for telling a story or giving information. Like the visual and the text together is very unique, and I think it's a really powerful medium. There's more women in the field, which is a good thing, because those women are role models, insofar as that it's very important in any kind of occupation for girls to see women in diverse roles.
Well, you don't entirely have to worry about that. Apparently, they are.
It's not the case. We seem to have a much larger female readership now. And that's fantastic. And I'm going to sound really full of myself, but I like to think that that's partially because of me. Because it's easier for me to introduce women to certain books than it is for my male counterparts here to introduce women to certain books.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, after all, you are considered the queen around here
I'm
of
the
comics.
Queen City Queen.
Yeah. How do you think the role of women in comics, fictional and non-fictional, has evolved throughout the years?
It's evolved a great deal from where it was. We have female writers now. We have female artists. And some of the female writers and artists are the best in the industry right now, no matter what gender. In comics, there has been an insanely great evolution of women. There's less sexuality, I think, in a lot of cases. Sometimes there's still too much of it. There's quite a few books where there's some really exploitive material in it. But I think for the most part, the industry has come around to accept women as not just sex symbols, but now they're really strong characters and influential, and also bringing a new level, a new group of people to the table to read these books.
Females in comics have definitely become stronger over the years, escaping that damsel in distress image, though the stereotype remains somewhat Lois Lane. Remember that comic book cover at the beginning of this video? It's from the comic Princeless. Though it's expanded to a larger story, it was originally about Princess Adrienne, who was locked in a tower by her parents to wait for her knights in shining armor. She didn't take pride in that role, so with the help of her friend / the dragon guarding her tower, Sparky, she escaped to save her other sisters in imprisonment. So, that's the video. So what? What should you take out of this? Well, like I said at the beginning, this affects our entire culture and the way we look at media. Girls from all over the world love comics. They're just as entertaining and are evolving as much as television. TV's been blamed for the impossible image that it portrays for women, and it's been criticized. Be honest, if you have a daughter, especially if she's my age, chances are she's said something negative about her body at some point. And yes, media can be blamed for that. But it can be empowering. There are several positive portrayals of females in television and comics. It just so happens that comics are a form of literature. Yes, you can argue that. Yes, it is. Comics will always have conflict in them. They'll always have some strange protagonist, even if you don't see them as one. All forms of this media, comics, graphic novels, the movies, the TV shows, anime and manga, have made such a major impact on the world. That's why Comic-Cons are so big, and why so many people like myself are so involved. I asked every person I interviewed, what makes a strong female character?
Well, strength of character first is the most necessary aspect of a strong female character. You have to have strength of character, you have to be able to roll with the overpowered male characters. I think being able to take control of situations, having your own title helps.
I think the same thing that defines a strong female character is the same thing that defines a strong male character. Are they interesting? Are they complex? Can you relate to them? That's the most important thing.
So yeah, a strong character is one who is there for more than the male character's purposes. What's that?
I don't think it's enough just to have, the quote-unquote strong female character if she's still by herself in the book, right? There's not other women who are in there, or if, she's a hero that then falls apart at the least little everything. This new Wonder Woman Superman / book drives me crazy.
Thank you.
Just speaking now from my own strip, I have 3 women characters who are the main characters. So their vulnerabilities are talked about, their insecurities are talked about. But I would still say that they're strong women. Like my Susan character, she's the one, I have one character who is worried about her weight. And she struggles with that. Now, if somebody were to say, what's a strong woman character? You'd probably say, well, she wouldn't care about her weight. She'd be, that wouldn't be an issue for her. But for this character, it is. But she's still her own person. And I don't think that her dealing with her weight issues or wanting to lose weight is anything that isn't reflective of the norm.
In fantasy comics, of course, a strong female character is often a literally strong female character. She usually has, superhuman powers, so that the whole size power difference that exists in real life is flipped on its head. But I guess my idea of a strong female character, I'd say it's just the same as any character. Is a person who's got dignity, a person who who knows how to speak their mind, and I think in any good story, whether it's a superhero story or otherwise, you have characters who learn what it means to go up against an adversary who has them over a barrel, and then figures out the way to subvert that, in whatever context is required, whether it's beating up a supervillain or defeating the nasty boss or whatever. So if I were to say what kind of female character appeals to me that is a strong female character, I usually just think of how well they're written, how interesting their dialogue is, how believable they are in that. But maybe you can rephrase the question there too. I just think of a strong character as a character who's got what the characteristics we call strong. A strong will, strong sense of their own identity, a little humanity, a little humility. But
different answers to reflect different types of people. Women, both fictional and non-fictional, whether in the comic book industry or reading the comics, are strong. It doesn't matter where you're from or what your past is, women are as strong as men. They don't have to be sex symbols, but they don't have to have no insecurities. It's facing those insecurities that make a woman stronger. I call myself a geek because I am one. I made this video because I knew I could. And I knew the true impact of women in comics.
History books about comic books in the comic book industry, and it was very heavily male dominated for a very long time.
And ironically, there is a male right behind you looking at comics. Hi.
It's okay, we're just doing an interview.
Recently.
Did the two doors?
There's a recent comic. They started battling because Thor wanted his hammer back.
I would think you would. Yeah, I can't say I blame him on that count. I'll have to read that. Lately I've been reading Fables, which I think has some very strong, because she owes the earth a body, and she owes the skies a soul. Oh, sorry.
Because they just realized how freaking low it is. Okay.
Oh, yeah, not really. But, so...
as girls became more infatuated with the comic... Okay, I'm gonna start. Take two. Hey, Uncle Jason.
Hey, Maya, how you doing?
I'm good.
So you lost my interview, the best interview I've ever given, and you just said, I don't care what hologram I'm just going to go.
I don't know what happened. I put it on my extra drive, and everything on my extra drive magically erased itself, and yours just so happened to be on that drive. was strange.
My newspaper had brought Kathy into the paper, and there was a picture of this woman, Kathy Geiswig, and they were like introducing that they were going to be running this strip, and I thought, and I always liked to do comics, but it had never ever occurred to me that I could actually have that as a career. Sorry, can you hang on for just a second? I don't know, I'm kind of rambling now.
It's okay. I mean, you got your point across. Like you. Oh, sorry. Oh gosh.
Oh, that's alright, my fault, right?
True. I guess we're even.
Crime, science fiction. I read the gamut of comics. I read everything from your standard superhero stuff to a autobiographical romance. Because it's all stories. It's all storytelling. And everybody loves stories. And I just want people to discover comics.
Thank you for your time.
I didn't babble on too much today.
No.